and puffing, it's because I beat them to the elevator. So, but we'll get started here shortly. It took a little longer than normal. We're now up to an official 435. And so the chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to a couple of things that were brought up earlier. Mr. Concanon, in your written testimony, you say that 42% of SNAP benefits lived in a household with working adults. Can you positively affirm that the working adult in the household is the SNAP participant? That's a yes or no.
The earnings.
No, sir. Let me rephrase it.
Okay.
Can you positively affirm that the working adult in those households is the SNAP participant? It's a yes or no.
Yes.
You can positively affirm that.
Yes, because anybody living in the household, their income is included in the SNAP benefit.
Well, it doesn't indicate that the income's from that participant, because it could be another adult in the household. And I bring this up because
anybody in the household is included in the benefit.
Nearly 70, your own information says that in 2013, 3/4 had no earned income, meaning they were not working at all. That's from USDA. That's your number.
I'm not sure what number you're referring to.
I'm referring to the Food and Nutrition Service Characteristics of Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program Households, fiscal year 2013, U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Yes, so if you're talking about children, for example, almost half of the folks on food stamps are children, then seniors and people with disabilities.
No, I'm talking about, you said 42% of SNAP participants lived in a household with a working adult, and then your 2013 report says that 75% had no earned income. And I just want to point out that inconsistency for the record. Ms. May, you may be aware that in some, I beg your pardon?
We're happy to provide you with clarification on that in writing.
I would appreciate that, and I believe the committee would too. Ms. Mayhew, earlier when Mr. Concanon indicated that he had run the main program, it appeared that you wanted to make a clarification. Would you like to do that now?
No, I appreciate.
Would you turn on your...
Mr. Concanon's response. Clearly, he was a commissioner of a Department of Human Services. Since that time, the agency has certainly changed somewhat. It merged to create a much larger agency, but certainly I appreciate the history that Mr. Concanon has, particularly with this program in Maine. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Staying with you, and we touched on this a little bit before we had to break away, do you believe there's a growing epidemic of SNAP benefits exchanging their cards for drugs?
I do, and it is certainly, as we look across all of our programs within the department and our desire to evaluate holistically our efforts to improve the lives of the individuals that we're serving. And certainly, as I said, both looking at these welfare programs and their support of vulnerable families and my oversight of child welfare, I am incredibly concerned about the impact of drug abuse in Maine and the role that EBT cards are playing, being trafficked in for drugs and certainly for cash.
This past February, my home state of Alabama started to allow individuals with previous drug convictions to be eligible for benefits such as food stamps. And it's coming at a time when Alabama's monthly average SNAP enrollment is almost 20% more, has almost 20% more Alabama enrollees than we have in K through 12 public education system. So we're giving out food stamps, SNAP benefits faster than we're educating children to prepare them to join our workforce. Why shouldn't we be able to require drug testing in the program to ensure that taxpayer money is going toward the recipients it was intended? And why should the state be obligated to fund those programs if the individual engaging in activity that's harmful to them is not conducive to their reintegration into society?
Congressman, we support drug testing. We have worked to increase drug testing in Maine. We have been met with resistance. We share your observations that these safety net programs are, in fact, intended to certainly help individuals out of poverty onto that pathway of prosperity and employment, and that any amount of substance abuse is detracting from their ability to succeed and to be self-sufficient and, again, on that pathway to employment. It is clearly counterproductive to those goals.
Mr. Chairman, with the indulgence of the committee and the chair, if I may, I'd like to make one other point, and that is in regard to Ms. Dean's comment that we went through a recession and apparently believes that our economy has recovered. I would wonder if our economy has recovered, why there are almost 5 times as many people on food stamps as there were in 2008 and 3 times as many as in 2009. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Eleanor Holmes Norton, for 5 minutes.
I just want to mention that the issues you're running into with drug testing is we can't just put people, drug test people. There has to be some predicate laid in a constitutional system to doing that, and that's why I think courts have been, cast some doubt on doing drug testing as drug testing. I do want to note, especially the GAO report, where no new recommendations were made. I think that means that the program is making some progress. And I know that the GAO report does note some continuing challenges, and the first one it notes is inadequate staffing levels. We want more of something, then we have to do more of something else. So I want to congratulate all of you involved in the program for what you've been able to do at a time of sequestration with what resources you have. The Congress is quick to chastise programs for what they haven't done, but offers very little self-criticism of what its obligation is. So I do want that for the record to be known. I also want to say for the record, some of us live on, have a tradition of trying to live for a week on SNAP benefits. All I can tell you, it took me close to starvation. So when I tried to adhere to it for a full week, so I'm pretty convinced that they're not extravagant rewards here for needing what we used to call food stamps. I was interested in this very low fraud rate because it's among the lowest, if not the lowest, in the federal government. You might expect it to be the highest, given what we've just gone through in the Great Recession and the like. And so I'm trying to get to the bottom of what's left. I'm not sure anybody could get it to zero, and I compliment you for trying to do that. But I want to know if the main part of SNAP's improper payments are administrative, or are they fraud?
If I may, Congresswoman, on the improper payment rate for the SNAP program, this refers to when consumers come into the program. 60% of that problem are mistakes made by state or county.
So give me examples of the kind of mistakes, of course.
Well, they may not correctly record the income of the consumer. 40% is on the mistake is made by the consumer, occasionally deliberately, but often it may be, hey, I didn't properly report my income, or my spouse or somebody else considered in the household had some part-time income. So, but 60% of it is a state mistake. When we look at improper payments, the chair referenced the $2 billion or so estimate. That's the combined underpayment as well as overpayment, because about 2/3 of it is an overpayment on the part of the state, but about 1/3 of it is we underpay consumers based on the revenue. And the convention has been the requirement. This used to drive me crazy when I was a state director. We have to count both of them as though they were aggregated.
I don't know why you have to count both numbers. They're not the same numbers. I'll tell you one thing, if you're undercounting, you never get that money back. So I don't even understand how it helps us to understand what's happening, to say, lob it all together, who cares? But
Will the gentlewoman yield for just a second? I'll be glad to work with her on that particular issue.
I thank the chairman very much for his intervention, and he's in a position to do it. I know he means it when he says it. He's my good friend. I understand when you see this low level, wow, that the program has very strict eligibility requirements and a rigorous application process. You know, people don't like what you have to go through to apply for anything in government. But is that the case, and how do you facilitate people getting their benefits when the eligibility requirements are so strict and apparently adhered to?
Well, I might point out something that there was reference earlier to the deep recession we've just come through. Prior to that deep recession, again, I spent 25 years as a state director in different states. Across the country, typically about half of the people who are eligible for the program were receiving it. They met the income eligibility, they were citizens of the United States, they're here legally. Only about half were receiving it. During the deep recession, more people came forward, but also states on a bipartisan basis, Democrats and Republican governors, simplified the process, still within the law, and now about estimated 85% of people who meet the eligibility requirements receive the benefit.
Well, it took a recession to do it, but I congratulate you for bringing forward people who are hungry and apparently needed the program all along. Look, I don't see a lot to complain about in this program with your low eligibility rate, with the GAO who loves to tell people what they're doing wrong, saying they don't have any current recommendations at this time, so you deserve the commendation of the committee as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 5 minutes.
Thanks much. I think we're eventually going to call on Ms. Mayhew, to ask questions, but I'll just make a little comment first. I think there's probably no program in my district that people come up and talk to me about more. People are aware almost anywhere that they sell food stamps or whatever, SNAP, for 50 cents on the dollar. And of course, if you needed every dollar on food, you wouldn't be selling your food for 50 cents on the dollar. So that by itself indicates that there's, people are getting these things who don't need them at all. I know somebody whose sister runs a grocery store, and she says you can tell just by what's in the cart who's got the SNAP and who's paying their own money. And I think that's routine, which also shows there's something fundamentally wrong with the program. It's one of many welfare-related programs that our employers attribute to having a hard time getting employees to work, because, of course, the more you work, the more you lose the benefits. And finally, it's something more and more we're hearing over time that discourages people from raising children in wedlock, because, of course, if you raise children in wedlock, like many other welfare benefits, you lose your SNAP. And I think that's probably, of all the bad things about the program, the worst. It's one more inducement to raise children out of wedlock, which is unfortunate. But we're going to start with Ms. Mayhew. Could you comment on, after you went through the wonderful things you did, are SNAP benefits still being sold for 50 cents on the dollar in Maine? What is the going rate as far as you know?
Well, certainly, we have, as I indicated, partnered with local law enforcement to both train them on the misuse of EBT cards, to provide assistance with them. We certainly continue to have cases where EBT cards are trafficked in. It's unfortunate for the congressman from Alabama. There was a very high-profile case about a year ago where, very similar to what you are describing, rampant trafficking in EBT cards, selling at 50 cents on the dollar, significant engagement with retailers. I think, certainly we all have shared the same goals of improving the integrity of this program. There is a need for additional fraud investigators. For the New England region, there's one fraud investigator for the USDA. I mean, I think that alone would indicate that we're under-resourced.
Right. I'll just give you the question, though. In Maine, what is the going rate for food share for SNAP right now? Are they selling them for 50 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar? What's the going rate?
I honestly can't comment on. I think that just varies on the individual who's trying to get cash.
Okay, well, as Ms. Dean, do you live here in the Washington, D.C. area? When you ask your local
Put
people
your
around here,
mic on, please.
what's the going rate for SNAP benefits in Washington, D.C. area?
I'm not sure that like Commissioner Mayhew, I don't think that there is a common understanding or a shared understanding of it. It is a very rare occurrence.
Wait a minute. Whenever I talk to people in the food stores or people of the class that get food share, they don't think it's uncommon. They tell me about these 50 cents on the dollar sales all the time. In Florida, Mr. Carroll, what is the going rate for SNAP in Florida?
I can't answer that definitively. I will tell you what made the Opelika flea market so popular to draw folks not only from Florida but around the nation was they were purchasing food stamps at 80 cents on the dollar. And we know that because on several of the stores that were raided, it was like a sales sign that you would go in and you would see all the things, and then you would see the 20% off sale. It was right on the registers how much $30 would be converted into, how much $600 would be converted into. So it was right there. Folks saw it. It was posted.
Okay. Mr. Concanon, when you get out and talk to people in the underclass, what are they selling their SNAP benefits for?
I travel across the country, including Florida, Maine. I was in Michigan earlier this week, as has already been noted. It is a rarity. I want to be very clear on that there are 44 million people in the country. The vast majority of them abide by the rules, just as there are 260,000 authorized retailers. Most of them abide by the rules, but we have a proposal out these days to strengthen the requirements for convenience stores. That's where much of this happens. I do want to make a comment on something you mentioned, because I think it's a misunderstanding. One, there is no penalty in the SNAP program if you're married or not married. If you live in the same household with somebody, you share the meal, we count that whether you're married or not. So there is not a marriage penalty. And I just want to be clear about that, because when that's expressed, people don't understand that. They think, hey, that's a problem. It's not part of the SNAP program.
No. Can I finish up? Because he's just saying something I don't think is true.
Well, we'll save that for a second round if we
Okay,
can
well,
at this
give me
point.
a second round.
Okay, so the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. SNAP provides critical support to people seeking to enter into the workforce by providing services to people who are looking for employment or training to become self-sufficient. In contrast to the stereotype that if you're on SNAP, you are at home, not working, Mr. Dean, some critics of SNAP believe that participation in SNAP discourages work. Yet your testimony states that the SNAP participants want to work and do work. Can you explain in more detail how SNAP helps people when they are unemployed and how it helps to support and encourage work? I'm sorry, Mrs. Dean, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Well, first of all, one of the core elements of the program that allows participants who aren't working to obtain and maintain a job is that the eligibility limits, while restrictive, are set significantly higher than, say, the cash assistance programs most states offer. So participants who are not working can get a job. Their benefits are reduced, but they can maintain eligibility. There's also an earnings disregard built in the program so that income coming from work is treated more favorably than income, say, from Social Security or other unearned sources. We see a significant share of participants working. If you look at working age adults who aren't disabled, over half of them are working, and if you look in the year before, the year after, a typical month of receipt, that goes to above 80%. The bottom line is that you cannot, it is nearly impossible to be poor in this country and not be working. There's very limited forms of assistance available to struggling unemployed families. The unemployment insurance program isn't an open door for low-income workers who are in and out of the workforce. TANF cash assistance is incredibly restrictive. SNAP is the benefit that is available to all low-income individuals, non-working and working alike.
I just can't pass up an opportunity to make a statement here. There's many who debate Planned Parenthood and contraceptives and say that the life of a child is precious. How can we debate that once a child is born, that we would not ensure that the child would not be hungry? In America, the SNAP program feeds poverty. Those who cannot provide, those who are working poor, so that they can have food. And I continue to say food is not a luxury, it is a human basic need. And so it troubles me when you have these conflict of philosophies. Once a child is born in this world and they're in America, we don't have a choice of whether we're born or not, we're born. And that in America, this program, SNAP, says that if you're in America, you will be able to get food to eat so that you could live. Just one last point, Ms. Dean. Many states have suspended the limit due to high unemployment rates during this recent recession, but that is now changing. I understand that some states are kicking hundreds of thousands of people off SNAP this year. Can you discuss why this is happening in some states and not in others?
Sure. The 1996 welfare law included a provision that limited SNAP to 3 months out of every 36 months, so 3 months out of every 3 years, for childless adults unless they are working 20 hours a week. It's a little bit more complicated, but that's the gist. States have the ability, and there's no obligation on the state to offer a job slot or test the individual's willingness to work. It is truly a time limit in most states that apply the rule. States have the ability to waive that rule in periods or in areas of high unemployment. And during the recession, virtually every state availed themselves of that opportunity to suspend the time limit so that food assistance could go to unemployed, needy people. As the unemployment rate has fallen, areas no longer qualify. And this year happens to be a year where over 20 states had to re-implement the rule, either because of their unemployment rates or they chose to. And as a result, we estimate a minimum of 500,000 people were removed from the program in April and May of this year. And we'll see data to confirm that in a month or so.
Thank you. In closing, I just want to say that this SNAP program, 1% fraud. I wish I could sit and look every federal agency in the eye and say that your fraud or your mismanagement is at 1% of everything that you do. I don't want any fraud, but I want to applaud this this team and individuals who are in this program, knowing that you're there to feed people in America. And today, in today's world, there are Americans who are going hungry every day.
I thank the gentlewoman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing, and for our witnesses, and the chairman for his work in this area, extensive work in this area. Mr. Concanon, how much money is spent annually on the food stamp program? How much is spent annually?
Total expenditure, including administration, $75 billion.
$75 billion. You know what it was 8 years ago?
No, I do not.
The chart I'm looking at says it was less than half of that.
Well, that was
37
before the deep recession the country went through, so I'm not surprised by that.
A lot of people would say we were in a recession in 7 and 8. I'm looking at that. So 2008, well, even if you go 2009, it's 50% greater, more than 50% greater. It was $53 billion just a few years ago. How many people are being served, are getting this benefit today?
44.3 million people receive the benefit each month.
And do you know how many of that 44.3 million are able-bodied adults?
Yes, we can give you that. I know that just under half are children, another 10% are people with disabilities, another close to 10% are seniors, some adults, but we can give you the actual percentage, a very small percentage of it.
Half are kids, 10% are individuals with disabilities, 10% are seniors. So is that 30% are
No, it isn't 30%. It's about 10% are adults without dependents, able-bodied adults without dependents.
So over 4 million?
Correct, in that range.
Okay. And Ms. Mayhew, my understanding is you've taken that population you just talked about, at least the ones who live in the state of Maine, and you've put back in place a work requirement for able-bodied adults. Able-bodied adults, I assume, with no dependents. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And what's been your experience with that program?
So these are individuals between the ages of 18 and 49, not disabled, no dependents. And we reinstated the work requirements from the 1996 reforms. We did—
Exactly the same requirements that were working fine back then.
Correct.
20 hours a week, got us some work requirements, some you got to show, 20 hours a month, or
20 hours.
20 hours a week, excuse me, that's right.
But there are other options. It's 20 hours a week, or working, or being in a vocational training program, or volunteering 1 hour a day.
So some options. All right, and what happened when you did that?
When we did that, we also reached out to all of these individuals through our Department of Labor career centers to offer them slots in programs to help them with work skills development, resume writing, opportunities to identify employment. We made over 12,000 phone calls to that population.
Hold on one second. Back up a second. What was the number in Maine when you, able-bodied adults 18 to 49 in the program? What was that number?
15,000.
15,000. What's the number? And you've implemented this program now several months?
We implemented that in the October 1st, 2014.
Okay, so a year and a half. And what have you seen happen? What's that? Is it 12,000 you said?
Yes. The vast majority did not come forward to demonstrate and comply.
So they're no longer in the program?
They're no longer in the program, but what is more important—
No, I'm asking, is that I would view that as a good thing. 'Cause my guess is what happened is they said, you know what, if I got to do all this job training, job requirement, why don't I just go get a job?
Exactly.
Imagine that.
And then we looked at their wages.
Right, and that's a good thing, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
And their wages have increased by over 114% from prior—
So you followed them up?
Yes, we did.
And Ms. Dean, is that not a good thing?
I think the question is, what's the counterfactual? How many of them would have gone and gotten jobs anyway? Because we know that there's a high—
But they did get a job, so that's a good thing, and they're no longer living off the taxpayer, right?
there's
So it's good for the taxpayer, and it's good for the individual. And you're saying, you're somehow implying, in questions I've heard from the other side, somehow that's not a good thing?
There's also a group of people who lost food assistance without a job.
Ms. Mayhew, what's that number?
I'm sorry, what was the comment?
She's saying that there's some of that 12,000 who are no longer getting food stamps who didn't get a job. Do you know what that number is?
We can get you that.
But the point is they could still get food stamps if they're willing to do the 3 options you gave them, correct?
Correct.
Okay, Ms. Dean, how's that negative?
I think there are many parts of the country where there are not
Okay,
part to full-time
but
jobs
I'm asking you about
available.
Maine. I'm asking you about Maine, because Maine's done it. That's the one experiment we have that I think is working win-win-win. Either they can do the job training, which is going to help them long-term and stay on food stamps, or they can do what most people did in Maine and say, you know what, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to get a real job, right? And if they decide to opt out and can't get a job, they can always come back and go to one of those three options. So tell me what is negative about that. That seems to be helping that individual who was in the system get to a better position in life, and just as importantly, help treat taxpayers with the respect they deserve so someone's not living off their tax dollars who's able-bodied. Why is that wrong?
Representative Jordan, you're not characterizing the rule correctly across the country. States
I'm
are
talking
not
about the state of Maine.
I cannot speak to whether Maine genuinely offered every single individual, whether a slot was available for them to participate in, and whether those individuals were appropriately screened. The Commissioner Mayhew can best do that. But the problem is that across the country, that's not happening. It's operating as a time limit. So individuals living in high unemployment areas or individuals who face barriers to work. For example, in Florida, there were disabled veterans who didn't have a 100% disability rating who were terminated from the program. They were not exempted. Work requirement is different. Work requirement is very different.
We just
than
heard that it
time.
wasn't, that this was not about people with disabilities. There's a big difference between able-bodied individuals between 18 and 49 with no dependents, and someone with a disability, and someone with children, and someone who's a senior. There's a big difference. If I could, Mr. Chairman, one last question. What is the number today, Ms. Mayhew, that's in that category in Maine? What's the number? It was 12,000. What's the number today?
It is less
Put your mic, please.
we can get you the final number, but obviously
Less than what?
less than 1,000 individuals.
Okay.
It's unbelievable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, for a generous 5 minutes.
I thank the generous chairman. Mr. Chairman, our colleague from Wisconsin just lately made a comment to the effect that the current SNAP program, the food stamps program, has the effect of encouraging women to bear children out of wedlock. And to respond to that, I'd like to recognize and yield to the gentlelady from the District of Columbia for 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, I think that the error rate speaks for itself and answers much that was raised in that regard. And I must say, at a time when we have reduced among poor people as well as middle-class people the birth rate, it is inconceivable to me that somebody says, you know what, why don't I go out and get pregnant so I can get some food stamps? I yield back to the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing today. It is shameful when women and families go hungry in the United States of America, and I will not be part of a system that forwards the chance that we'll have that in this country. I strongly support the food stamp program, SNAP, among other food assistance programs for this reason. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for their work to relieve hunger in this country. I'd like to also point out two numbers related to fraud and waste in the SNAP program that have been touched upon here. In 2014, less than 3% of SNAP benefits had error associated with them, and the trafficking rate is down to 1%. And it occurs to me that the SNAP program is improving at its good job of ensuring the limited resources it is given are being used properly. We can and should do more to relieve hunger. That's why I'm reintroducing the SNAP Healthy Incentives Act, and this expands a pilot program nationwide that we've done in which SNAP participants received a 30-cent rebate for every SNAP dollar they spent on fruits and vegetables. Now, this pilot program proved to be successful, and it proved a 25% increase in the consumption of healthy foods. Now, Under Secretary Concanon, can you tell us a little bit more about the types of people who are aided by the SNAP program?
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you for introducing that act. The Healthy Incentive Pilot was highly successful, and earlier this week I was in Michigan. I've seen firsthand discussions with community leaders around the country on the impact of SNAP. Now, as has been mentioned earlier, nearly half of the recipients on SNAP, it's 48% plus, are children. Another 10% are people with disabilities and other seniors and other parents looking after young children. But I also want to emphasize again something that has been mentioned already. 42%, 2 out of every 5 persons living in a SNAP household, at least one of the adults is currently in the workforce. And that income is counted in the benefit. And to me, that's the highest rate of people working in the history of the program. And it, to me, reflects the fact that across the country, more and more people are getting part-time jobs, or they're struggling with low wages that still qualify them for the benefit. So I think that's something that ought to be really more fully discussed by Congress and others to say, what can we do about that? In places across the country, economists tell us the recession is over for many, but it's not over for tens of millions of people. In places like Maine, to be perfectly frank, or just about any state in the country. And so the program has very much become a supplement, as by intent, for wages and help for families. And I think it gets very stereotyped in some quarters, I think very unfairly. There's a very low fraud rate, has a very low rate of misuse of the funds. We don't tolerate it, but poor income people, whether they're from Florida, Maine, or any other state, shouldn't be painted as though they are among that small minority who are misusing the program. That's not the history of the program across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Concanon. And Ms. Dean, I wanted to also thank you for your testimony today and all of your work in your adult life in support of nutrition assistance. You know, Republicans in the House are proposing turning SNAP into a block grant and eliminating the social services block grant. And I wanted to get your input on the wisdom of that approach and whether you think it would do anything to eliminate the low percentages of errors and fraud that we're hearing about today.
Just very briefly, we think it would be very ill-advised, and the experience and history of block grants would suggest that converting SNAP into a block grant would increase hunger and hardship amongst low-income Americans because less food assistance would be available to them over time. It's also highly likely, as you're pointing out, that error and fraud would become a more serious issue because you would start to have well, in SNAP there are 53 states, Ms. Plaskett representing one of them, 53 states with different rules, different criteria, and lots of complexity and duplication on which stores to bring into the program and how to administer and ensure that everyone is adhering to the rules.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I yield back to you in your generosity.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania. The chair recognizes himself for a series of questions. So let me, we've talked a lot about fraud rates and what it is and what it is not, and yet I hear a lot of testimony that shows a lot of ambiguity in that area. So Ms. Brown, let me come to you. Do we really know what the fraud rate is? Do we have good data?
Well, the rates that we're hearing about with fraud, I believe, are the trafficking rates for retailers. That's
right.
the
And
one.
those are 3 years old, aren't they correct?
Yes, there have been a number of questions that have been raised about the estimate, but I don't want to underplay the fact that it's a very difficult estimate to make.
So to suggest that that 1% or 2% is accurate would be very difficult with any degree of certainty to ascertain that based on the reporting and the way that we track fraud and abuse at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, and it doesn't include we don't really know what the rate of trafficking or fraud is for on the recipient side. So,
right.
You know, the percentages that we talked about with the 60% that's the fault of the states when they're making mistakes, and the one-third that's the problems with the recipients, some of that can be intentional error, that would be fraud, and then in addition to that, once they receive the benefits, if they traffic, that would be fraud.
Right, and so that number and being able to do that, Mr. Concanon, I'll come to you, hold on just a second. You're always ready to jump in. I can see your rebuttal, I tell you, but as we look at that, I will come, because here's my concern. When we talk about fraud, and for me, I want to make sure that every single person that deserves the benefit and is starving gets the benefit. But the bad actors, I want to make sure they go home and they go home for good. And so if anything is said here is it's not just about fraud and abuse for an individual. It is taking away finances from those that are deserving. And that can be a bipartisan issue. I mean, if we put forth that any saving from fraud actually went to increase the benefits for some of the others that are receiving it, we would find some real uniform bipartisan support for that. So I guess, Ms. Brown, we need to do a better job. So how can we do that? Let me come to you, Mr. Carroll, because one of the things that you said really concerned me. We've got a flea market where there was trafficking going on, and there have been no arrests for fraud at that particular point. We've not been able to prove it. Did I hear you correctly? Need your mic.
There have been arrests. What we have not been, the process involves, it's a pretty complex process, but our investigation into that flea market began in 2011 when we saw abnormalities.
And you were doing it from the recipient side, not from the retailer side, is that correct? We were doing it from the recipient side where we got information that food stamp cards kept coming back to us in the mail, the EBT cards. We checked up on it. That address didn't exist. We did some further exploration. We found out that that was probably identity theft. We then tracked where that card was used, and it led to the flea market, so we started surveilling that flea market. And at that time, in 2011, there were 5 authorized vendors. It took 2 years, but after 2 years, 2 of those 5 authorized vendors were arrested. But within a matter of days, the 3 vendors that were left absorbed that business because business continued to grow at that flea market. Now, at that flea market, we have 48 authorized vendors with 4 more pending, and that flea market has done $79 million worth of business. Now, to put that in perspective, they have done more business than the 6 super box stores that were within a 5-mile radius of them combined. They have done more business in that flea market during that time period than the 16 major supermarkets that are in a 5-mile radius combined. So to say that our fraud rate is 1%, I think it's underestimated. But here's what concerns me about this, and this is what I think confuses folks, because I think your point is well made. I'm not here to demean recipients of public assistance. I strongly support public assistance programs, and we do that in Florida. We have done everything in Florida to make it easier for folks who are eligible to apply. We've gone to an electronic system. Folks don't have to take off from work. They apply online. Even the automated identification system, it wasn't made to keep people out of the system. It was made so that we didn't have to bring people into the office. Because if we could authenticate your identification without you coming into the office and taking time out of work, why not do that? That's why we did it. And so we have done everything we could to make it easier to apply. Since 2008, the number of recipients in Florida has gone from 1.3 million to we have currently 3.3 million recipients on food stamps in Florida. And our food stamp redemption numbers have gone from 2.8 to 5.6. So to say that our concern around fraud is about somehow pointed at trying to demean folks who are on public assistance or to limit access, I think is misguided. I do think the numbers that you talked about are difficult to come by. I think with the automated system in Florida, we do a better job of preventing what I would call recipient fraud in terms of, because what we used to battle years ago was folks coming in and, quite frankly, not being truthful about their situation. We see less of this. This is not, in Florida, this is not about the folks who walk through our door and apply for assistance. It is not about how they use their food stamp card. I wish my family ate healthier. I wish I didn't put so many Mountain Dews in the carriage, okay? And I think the more we put together legislation like that, we just go down rabbit holes and we spend administrative costs chasing after things we shouldn't chase after. But I will tell you, there is an element that is organized that is, where their intent is to defraud, and it starts with folks who come into the system and get benefits and they're not who they purport to be. Part of this, ID authentication process identified
2,800 people, for instance, last year that applied that were dead. Another 2,800 people that applied that were incarcerated. Without doing the things that we did from an electronic standpoint, we would have never been able to prevent that. We can now. But our big challenge now is with authorized vendors. The number of folks who are authorized, and I understand, I am not here to impede small business. We want to grow small business. But we have got to make sure that when we are, it's got to be more than taking a snapshot of the front of a store, putting a driver's license together, sending it in, and asking that I be an authorized vendor. And we have to do some work around, is that a real legitimate business? Because some of these businesses that we're authorizing as retailers are not legitimate businesses. And I do agree with Secretary Concanon that the overwhelming amount of people on food stamps are there rightly so and are using their benefits appropriately, overwhelmingly. But I will tell you, that small percentage, when you look at a program like ours that does $5.6 billion worth of business, even a small percentage is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And it grows a stigma for the rest of the folks who are out there who need these benefits, who need the hand up, and who are trying to provide these assistance.
And that's precisely why we're having this hearing, because it shouldn't be a stigma that everybody is cheating the system, and sometimes that gets a default. That's where we run. I appreciate your heart. Mr. Concanon, I gave you your rebuttal time. I'm way over. You go ahead, and then I'm going to recognize the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief. Just wanted to mention the way we derive that figure of 1.3%. When we take a small store out of the program, and last year it was like 2,300 stores. Most of the trafficking, by the way, happens in small stores. Supermarket chains won't tolerate it. Walmart, Hannaford Brothers up in Maine, they're not going to tolerate that. So when we take a small store out, we ascribe 90% of the annual use of food stamp benefits or SNAP benefits in that store as though it were trafficking. And if it's a larger store, we ascribe 40%. That's how we get to the 1.3%. If anything, it's a conservative estimate. So I want to be clear on that. We're not just counting, individuals. So with that, point one. Point two, we currently have proposed strengthening the requirement, especially for these small stores, because I fully agree with Mr. Carroll that some stores are in the program that absolutely shouldn't be. That's where we have our problems.
Well, we'll get
pushback on
We'll
that.
get to that. And so we'll get to that, because that's one of the areas that honestly I want to drill down on exactly what we're doing there. Let me tell you my concern with what you just said. You only know what you know. And so fraud is only to the point of where you actually have inspectors going out. I would assume you have a limitation on the number of people who can actually follow that. Or are you fully staffed? You've got as many people as you ever would want?
Interestingly enough,
yes or no? As many people as
fraud is coming from data analytics.
That's not the question. Do you have as many people inspecting as you really need?
We can never say we have enough.
All right, thank you. I thought that would be the answer. The gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands is recognized.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And I guess if you don't have as many as you need, and this committee is concerned with you stopping fraud, they'll be very helpful to increasing the budget for the SNAP program so that you can have the funding to be able to enforce it. Because although I think the chairman is sincere and, is one of the people who is concerned about the right individuals having this, my concern is that I don't think everybody on his side really thinks that way as well. I sit on the House Committee on Agriculture and I sit on the Subcommittee on Nutrition. And in the last 17 months, we've had 14 hearings on SNAP. 14 hearings on SNAP. And the purposes of those hearings, if in my mind, being to say why SNAP should be cut back, why it's not effective, why we need to stop this, why we need to stop feeding the people that we're feeding. Why do we need to stop feeding people? I mean, my mother would lose her mind if you denied someone a plate of food because it was painful for you to give it up. This program, we say, is about lifting people out of poverty. And I think the indictment is on us as a body, this Congress, who has not lifted enough people fast enough as we should. And in turn, what's happening, I think more often than not, is that we have these hearings to indict the people who are recipient of SNAP program, the recipients of those individuals who are still living in poverty. So we've said that SNAP is a program that we would like to focus quite a bit of our time on for the abuse and the fraud that it has. From the statistics, it seems that there's only 1% of the 45 million recipients and 1% of the money that's going for trafficking. Would we like to see that those numbers are corrected? Of course. But we need the funding to be able to do that. Because are we going to take the funding out of the people that are receiving the money? Or are we going to add additional funding for the administrative portion? That's the question that I would like to pose on the other side. And one of the other issues that I'm very concerned about is it seems that the legislative proposals are really to eliminate the ability of states and territories to request waivers from the strict work requirements already contained in the SNAP laws. And the reason that's a concern is that because there is a chronic rate of high employment rate in many of these areas. We talked about people going to convenience stores rather than going to the big box or the grocery stores. More often than not, it's because they can't afford to drive to those other places because they live in food deserts. And, it's not that people don't want to work, but there are no jobs for them to work. And are we going to keep these time restrictions and cut out the waivers for this so that people now don't have a meal? The majority of people who are on SNAP are not able-bodied individuals. They are women and children and elderly people who cannot work. Ms. Dean, do you think elimination of work waivers, and especially in high areas of unemployment, how would that impact those places that have unemployment?
Well, I think the Virgin Islands would be a good example. Currently, the islands waive the time limit, so the time limit is not in effect. If it were to elect to drop it, given your relatively high unemployment, the shutdown of certain businesses in recent years, that would mean that there are individuals willing to work who cannot find work. There are also individuals working less than 20 hours, say 18 hours, who would lose the food assistance as a wage supplement to them. So it just means increased hunger and hardship, more demand on local charities. It's ill-advised, given that there is this terrific program available to help feed people that supports and encourages work.
Now, when you have your recipient of SNAP and you have the EBT card, can you buy every piece of grocery or every need in your household from that?
The benefits are based on a food plan called the Thrifty Food Plan, and it is meant, theoretically, for someone with perfect information in an extreme environment to be able to purchase enough. But we believe, and actually have a paper coming out next week that suggests that it really is insufficient to purchase a healthy diet.
So what are the things that you would not be able to purchase?
Well, I think there are trade-offs, fresh fruits and vegetables, whether you can buy foods with sufficient low levels of sodium versus highly processed foods. A lot of participants substitute in starches versus protein and, as I said, fruits and vegetables. That having been said, SNAP participants do purchase very consistent with how the average American purchases. They do an incredible job with the benefits that they have, but we think they do much better if they had sufficient resources.
A woman who is a single parent and has a child, have you ever seen instances, because I know I have, of that individual, as my colleague talked about, using the SNAP money to purchase other things, to use it to buy diapers, or to use it to buy things that are necessities that we have not, as a country, been able to supply them the resources to be able to take care of? Have you seen some of the fraud be based on that?
To be clear, that is also not legal, and it is unacceptable. But yes, some mothers with young children face extraordinary choices, just extraordinary choices, and taking care of their children, as you're, I think, trying to illustrate with the question, is always going to come first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the additional time.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Lujan Grisham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for this hearing. And frankly, I agree with my Democratic colleagues in recognizing that the SNAP program as a policy is a very important policy to protect seniors and children and families in poverty and folks in the military, with a focus on making sure that they don't go hungry. And like many of my colleagues on this committee, I want to make sure that we address the fraud issues. And we also, as my Ms. Plaskett, my colleague from the Virgin Islands, just identified, that there are issues that we need to address that don't meet the requirements of the program, but still shine a light on the extraordinary circumstances that so many of these families face. And I want to point out that even when we have fraud where someone is selling their food stamp benefit, they're in collusion with the grocery store and the private sector. And so we really need to be thinking about that. And I want everyone to know, and I think they do, that SNAP, I think, is one of the most important policies and programs in this country, and that I believe, based on the evidence that I've seen, that generally speaking, it has a very low fraud rate. I think that that's a remarkable standard. What I wish for every program, that there was a zero fraud rate. But I do want to talk about the integrity of the program as a whole. And I'm very, very concerned about that on two levels. I have very deep concerns about the integrity of the SNAP program in my state, in New Mexico. I believe that these problems are clearly being caused by the way the state is administering the program and the fact that I don't believe that the federal government has been providing sufficient oversight. And the results are that many eligible New Mexicans who need emergency benefits are not getting them. And the overall result, of course, is that they're going hungry, which is why New Mexico has some of the hungriest children and families in the country still. Now, Mr. Concanon, in your testimony, you are very clear that FNS needs to take a look, and I think I'm quoting you, look carefully at states that are pushing recipients off SNAP programs or are not processing SNAP applications or application recertifications in a timely manner. And I know that you're aware that the state of New Mexico has been doing just that, because we're in court, we've sent you letters, we've asked you to do an investigation, we've been very involved. And that these New Mexico advocates that you and I have personally spoken about have been raising this issue, in fact, with your office for years. In fact, our office received a formal letter in April from the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, which represents many of the state employees involved in this issue who administer the SNAP program. And Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to enter the letter into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I was pretty sure that was going to occur. Thank you, sir. Now, these employees, as you know, allege that the state has failed to provide training and staff support, and all true, so that what's occurring in New Mexico is that in order to meet the time request to deal with emergency applications, they are adding assets to falsify those applications so that people don't get the benefit that they deserve and need. That's a very serious integrity program. But just as terrible and heinous as that is, that current court records indicate that that's been going on since 2003. So in addition to the years that I've been asking the department to look at this, and in addition to the April letter where I asked for an investigation, it looks as if the department's had information about this very issue since 2003. We can see that one of those results is you're the hungriest state in the country. Now, the most disturbing thing to me, I just want to repeat this, isn't these lapse of audits and integrity and issues between the federal government and the state government. The most egregious issue here is that I have vulnerable families that aren't getting the support that they deserve. And according to AFSCME, there's a pattern in practice of adding these assets that should have been counted as income, or adding assets in order absolutely to prevent people in our state who are eligible for being eligible. So basically, the state is lying to you, Mr. Concanon, and it is also clear to me that we have not been holding them accountable since at least July of 2014. Now, I need to understand why your office didn't know about these violations since 2003 and hasn't responded to us and others when you had clear knowledge of what's going on. So before the Ask Me letter, given all of these issues, why didn't your office take, and then after, why didn't your office take immediate action?
The gentlewoman's time has expired, but please answer the question.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Let me just, in the support of the Congresswoman's concerns, confirm that I believe New Mexico is probably the most fouled up SNAP system in the United States right now, and has been, unfortunately, I think, for years. There is a major federal lawsuit that's been underway there for many, many years that I think even the courts have been less than successful in getting the state to really fully respond. We have been engaged with the state, offering them additional support, offering them additional technical assistance, just as we also are in receipt of that letter.
And I'm
from
out of
AFSCME
time,
on
and
the
Mr. Chairman,
26th.
I know that you're really patient with me, but you know what? Giving them technical assistance when they're lying to you, they're cheating the beneficiaries, they're not protecting the beneficiaries, they're in federal court. This requires investigatory action and audits, which is exactly what this entire committee wants.
It is
for
being
all of these
investigated
programs.
right now by the
Because in a letter
Inspector
from your
General
office, we don't have that. They are being investigated for this issue.
Since that letter from AFSCME, the state IG in New Mexico is investigating those claims. We also had a visit to several of their offices in May. We did not identify that in our management review of those two offices, but the state Inspector General is currently investigating the state for those very claims.
As I yield back my time, and the chairman's being very generous, what I have in writing from your office, sir, is that you're going to hold beneficiaries accountable for overpayments, and that there is not an ongoing investigation about this issue. So I'm very happy to hear that what we have in writing is incorrect, and I'm expecting you to put in writing your statements today so we get this rectified. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so let me follow up on the gentlewoman's, while she is closest to this particular issue, and I think this is really one why we have Maine and Florida here today, is that we have a representative from New Mexico that is up close and personal with a particular problem. So, Mr. Concanon, do I have your assurance that you will report back to this committee with a plan of action of how to address her concern within the next 14 days?
Yes, you do, but I do want to be clear, the problem is on the part of the state,
I didn't ask
not
you-
consumers.
Well,
not consumers.
so you don't have any involvement whatsoever?
No, we have involvement, but
Okay,
I'm
well,
just
then
saying
let's-
that it's the state agency that is at fault here, not the consumers of the
Okay,
SNAP program.
I
in
understand.
New
She's
Mexico.
made the point, but what she also said is that you haven't been forthcoming in following up with her. And what I'm saying is, from the other side of the aisle, that is inexcusable.
Well,
Wouldn't
I
you
don't-
agree?
I don't accept that claim. I don't
Okay.
accept that we have
Well,
not been forthcoming.
The gentlewoman is yield back, so let me go ahead and recognize myself for a series of questions, because Mr. Concanon, you come and you're very quick to point at Maine and suggest that what they're doing is not adequate from a standpoint of the way that they're conducting it, and that was really early on. You were very quick to do that. But yet when my good friend and the gentlewoman from New Mexico points out a problem where you have not even responded properly, you're not willing to take and accept responsibility. I think that that's a double standard, wouldn't you?
I haven't said we haven't responded. I've said we've been doing evaluations of New Mexico. We're not happy with their performance.
But there is no
We've offered
investigation
them
going on at this point.
Yes, there is. The Inspector
But
General
by the
of the state.
by the state, by the federal, by the OIG of the federal government for USAID or USDA, is there any?
I can't speak for the OIG because I don't.
Would you
I know they're aware of it.
Would you
but
recommend?
I can't tell you what they
Would
are.
you recommend that there would be a federal investigation?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
All right, so let me go on a little bit further. Ms. Mayhew, one of the things that I was perplexed by as I started looking at statistics of SNAP use by Maine recipients in other states other than Maine. And by the list that I got, it looks like they're using benefits all over the country, indeed all over the world, and yet It comes from your state. Would you say your state is atypical? Is it unique that you have a lot of SNAP travelers?
Maine is not unique.
Okay, so if it's not unique, I guess one of the questions I have is, and just looking at one of the numbers that popped out happened to be in Mr. Carroll's state. And so I've got Maine recipients who are getting SNAP benefits that travel apparently to Florida. And there are, over the last 5 years, there's been over 3,700,000 and change benefits from Maine that get used in Florida. Is that correct, Ms. Mayhew?
That is correct.
So how do you stop that? I mean, are they just traveling? So is this somebody that just happens to travel with SNAP benefits and go down there? Or are they going to the flea market where Mr. Carroll is doing and cashing it in? I guess I'm very concerned in that he's doing a great job, and even, I guess, Mr. Concanon, you would recommend that Florida is doing a great job. So you've compensated. Oh, in fact, there's a bonus. Didn't y'all get a bonus for good? Have y'all paid that bonus?
No, we have not paid the bonus.
And why not?
2015, no.
Why have you not paid the bonus?
Because we have some concerns about the.
Well, you just said he did a good job.
Well,
you
no,
can't have it both ways.
Florida's doing a good job, but I'm not.
Well, that's Florida. I'm
not
talking about the
translating
$7
that to
million
whether we should
payment.
Pay the bonus.
So why are you holding up the $7 million payment on someone who's recognized as doing a great job? Why would you be holding that up?
Because I want to make sure that what we're getting are valid reports from states across the country.
So you're holding up his to make sure that you get valid reports from everybody else?
I'm holding all of them up.
Okay, when can we expect a response on his money, his bonus money? And he didn't ask me to ask this, by the way. So when can we expect you to get resolved?
As soon as I'm satisfied.
How many days?
Satisfied? No, it's not a matter of days.
Well, you're going to give
be
me some days. When will you report back to this committee? 30 days, is that enough to evaluate it?
No, it may take longer than that because we're in the middle of investigating that right across the country right now, not just in Florida, in states right across.
So you're saying you don't owe it to Florida? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure if we do.
All right. You have 30 days to address that issue and make a compelling case on why you're not paying it to them, to this committee. Are you willing to accept that? To make a compelling case?
I'm willing to report back to the committee within 30 days, but I'm not sure whether the matter
Mr.
will be
Concanon, let me
resolved.
just tell you, what concerns me is that you supposedly have the answers for all food stamp ailments. And yet, what I'm seeing are experts here that are on the ground that, in my opinion, know a lot more about what's going on in their states than you do, and now you're going to hold it up because Mr. Carroll has supposedly done a great job. You just admitted it under sworn testimony, and yet you're saying you're not going to give him a bonus for good performance.
I said he's doing a good job. I didn't say he deserves
Well,
a
let me
bonus.
just tell you.
So
This will not be the
I'll get
last
back to
hearing
you.
then. We'll have you back. If you're going to report back in 30 days, I would appreciate that. Ms. Mayhew, let me come to you. Why do you think there is so much use of Maine SNAP benefits across the country?
Well, certainly, as I indicated in our testimony, there are no federal SNAP regulations that would restrict the mobility of that benefit. We have concerns about around that. Now, certainly states have access to EBT card transactional data. We have invested in efforts, software applications to analyze that EBT card transactional data, to look at that out-of-state use. We've established triggers when a card is used for a prolonged period of time, 2 months or more out of state. That is a red flag that certainly the individual may no longer be a resident of the state, but it may also be an indicator of other activity that's not consistent with the requirements of the program. That is an effort that we certainly believe all states need to be using data analytics and tools to analyze out-of-state transactions.
So I show that there's been $64 million worth of Maine benefits used in other states. Is that correct?
That is correct, and certainly this is across the country, and including St. John and Las Vegas and California, there have been Maine EBT cards used. Now that is both food stamps, but would also include other benefits on the card, including TANF.
All right, so as we look at that, Ms. Brown, from a GAO perspective, that type of tool that allows us to track those benefits and where they're being used and perhaps allow for better fraud prevention, is that a tool that you have, or is that a tool that we could use, as Maine has used it, to give us a better picture of potential, and I say potential fraud?
Well, the issue of people using their benefits in other states has been something that's come up many times, both whether there were questions of fraud, but also whether there are questions that recipients are applying for and receiving benefits from multiple states. And we do have and are looking right now at some data sharing applications that would shed some light on whether they were actually receiving benefits from multiple states. And USDA has activity in that area too. I don't know of anything.
So could we get a report like this for every single state where we see the benefits that are being used in other states? Is that something that's easy for you to do, GAO to do?
I'm not sure if it's easy for GAO to do.
How about you at USDA, Mr. Concanon? Can you get us that?
We could certainly, on SNAP, on food stamp benefits, as the Commissioner mentioned, those benefits you're talking about in those several states include other functions that are on that same EBT card. So I'd caution against that. The majority of
what do you
state
mean
benefits
you
for
can't
Maine are
get the
actually-
information?
We can give it the information for SNAP, not for
TANF.
the TANF or for child support, as the case in many states too.
All right, Mr. Carroll's wanting to weigh in. I saw the pencil go up.
I do, and I'm glad that Ms. Brown brought this up. We're in a collaboration right now with 5 southern states that border us, so that we electronically, upfront, when somebody applies for assistance, can ping our data off of their data to make sure that they're not concurrently receiving assistance in 2 states. That's a pilot program. We've been working with our federal partners on doing that, and it's, quite frankly, it's worked quite well. I hear there's another 15 states going to come in on that, and we hope at some point that all 50 states are up on it, so at least we can stop folks from receiving in multiple states. The issue that we have with folks using food stamps in other states, it's like everything we deal with. It's complex. You got to peel the onion back, because in Florida, when you look at the panhandle, it's usual for somebody to cross the border and use it at the nearest grocery store, maybe in Alabama, if you live in Pensacola. It may be in Georgia. It may be in Louisiana. So we see some of that. But I can tell you, to have folks from 6 or 10 or 12 states visiting the Opelika flea market, if you've walked through the Opelika flea market, that is not a tourist destination. So there's something going on there. And what we don't know is, I don't think that folks physically came here from Maine to use their card or to sell their card here. I suspect it was more related to, we have ID thieves in southern Florida that we know are now applying for assistance in Missouri, that now are applying for assistance in New York. They probably apply for assistance in Maine. And because there's no way these folks are physically coming to Florida to go to the Opelika flea market.
Yeah, I've been there. I can assure you got to be going there to get there. So I mean, it's as we look at that, Mr. Carroll, let me point out one thing, and Mr. Concanon, I want to come back to you because I mentioned bonus things, and it was really just a footnote. I want to make sure, Mr. Carroll, you have not asked me to address that, and I want you to hear that, Mr. Concanon. The relationship between the two of you, I think, is a very good one. It's one that I want to continue to support and applaud. And so my interaction here is more of frustration out of trying to make sure that we don't create a disincentive for good performance. And when you have someone who's performing well, I want to make sure that the compensation's there. And the other aspect, Mr. Concanon, and I'll close with part of this. If you're asking the states to really look and police the recipients, would it not be prudent to allow them to police the retailers as well? And I'm not asking for you can comment on that if you like.
Yes, I can comment on it because we've given, for example, Maine, we entered into what we call a SLEB agreement. We have one in Florida as well, where we allow them to, the police agencies, to, if you suspect something is going on, I'm aware that we have an agreement currently out on the West Coast with the state that states can come forward. One, report to us that they're, here's my complaint on all of this. I am confident we're going after stores across the country. I'm a lot less confident that states, with due respect, are going after the individuals who are using places like that Loca Market or whatever it's called. And we have urged states.
You
when we take
butchered
a
that,
store
but
out-
that's okay. We will,
when we take a store out, I have urged states, these people have been at meetings when I've said to them, look at the redemption history in the previous 3-6 months, and you will see, based on the amounts of redemption, the time of day, where people are from, you will identify. And yet, it's a handful.
Okay.
I think in Maine last year, the year before, 2 people were taken out of the program for trafficking.
Okay, Mr.
So
Kincannon,
there's not much going on that
let me tell you, it's harder to go after the recipient, and it's very easy for you to make statements about recipients when that's not under your purview, when actually the retailers are under your purview right now. And here's what I'm saying, and I'll come to you, Mr. Carroll, because I think you want to. What I'm saying is maybe let's look at a pilot and give all authority for policing the retailer to the states. And maybe let's do it in 2 or 3 states. You know, part of the Farm Bill actually asked for you to come up with some pilots on fraud. And have you done any of those pilots? Yes, we've actually. Your mic, please. Your mic.
We've made grants to these states, Maine including.
No.
Yes, we have.
So in what form did you do a pilot? Because I haven't seen any results or even start of a pilot, and you're
No,
under
they have
sworn
started.
testimony.
They have
so
started.
You may want to check with your staff behind it. What kind of pilots have you done?
We have made grants to these states.
That's not what I asked. The Farm
Okay,
Bill was
some of the
very specific. It said for you to set up pilots to do that. I voted for the Farm Bill, and so I know that it's there. So
Great.
have you done any pilots?
Yes, we have.
In what states?
There are a list of them here. We'll give you a number. Maine is one of them on case management, for example. We've given Maine money, and there are some other examples
Carroll?
on that line.
Mr. Carroll,
SLEB agreements with a number of states as well.
what's
yes, we'll give you the list of states and what they're doing.
Mr. Carroll, is what we're talking about, does that go far enough to solve your flea market problem?
No, and first of all, I want to say to Undersecretary Kincannon that when we have partnered and they have gone after vendors, we'd have a very strong partnership. What I'm worried about is even using their definition of a high-risk vendor. We have over 16,000 authorized retailers in the state of Florida. Based on the definition that classifies some of those vendors as high risk, 13,000 of our vendors are high risk. And if you use the statistic out of FNS in terms of what percentage of those might potentially be actively engaging in this activity, it would be about 2,300. FNS in the state of Florida gets to about 100 of these establishments' investigations per year. So based on that, it would take us 23 years to get through that population.
All right, so hold on. Your sworn testimony here today is that based on the potential for fraud in Florida of 2,300 retailers, with the way that we're going after those, it would take 23 years to evaluate all of those?
With the way we do investigations and the current staff available to those folks.
That's unacceptable. I'm just telling you, that's unacceptable. And so I'm going to go ahead and come to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for his second round, and we'll close up.
Well, thank you. Couple things. First of all, I want to respond to something one of the other congressmen said, where he, I think, intentionally mischaracterized what I said or lied about what I said. With regard to my exchange with Mr. Kincannon, the question is, when you have so many programs, the benefits of which disappear when you marry somebody with an average income, the question is whether it affects people's decision as to whether or not to get married. And when you add up the Medicaid and the SNAP and the low-income housing and the Pell Grants and the disability for kids, you can wind up with huge amounts of money. So I think what was said was what I said was completely mischaracterized. But I'll ask Mr. Kincannon again, because I think you gave me a wrong answer as well. There is a marriage penalty, I believe, associated with SNAP, and you sit there and shake your head on that. But if you marry somebody who moves in with you and they are making, let's say, $40,000 a year, isn't it true that if the person initially has some benefits, that you will lose your SNAP benefits as well as many other benefits which you are entitled to by your classification of being low income, because no longer you and the father of the child are considered low income? Isn't that true, Mr.?
No, what's true is this. If somebody moves in with you, whether they are married or not, their income is counted in the SNAP program.
That's exactly right, Mr.
Period.
McCann. That's exactly right. So first of all, assuming you catch somebody who's moved in, which a lot of times is not, I'd argue most times is not, but if you decide to move in with the father of your children, and the father of your children is making $40,000 a year, will you not lose the SNAP benefit?
Yes.
That's what we call a marriage penalty. Very good. Now, a question for Mr. Carroll. Congressman Meadows dealt with this a little bit, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the National Accuracy Clearinghouse, right? And that was a very successful program, correct?
Well, it's a pilot.
It's a pilot, but would
yeah.
you say you discovered people who were getting SNAP benefits in more than one state or trying to get SNAP benefits in more than one state?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Substantial number, right?
I have to get back to you the number. I don't have that number, but there is an active number, sure.
Somebody here put down on this thing they gave me, currently Florida averages 162 matches a day. Is that possible?
That's correct.
Okay. I guess I would call that a successful pilot program. I'll ask Mr. Concanon what you've learned from that pilot program and whether you think that would be a good idea to follow up with that pilot program all over the country.
Yes, I do. I support the program, and again, when I meet with commissioners, I tell them, do data matches with other states. You can do it in batch. You don't have to do it exactly the way that was structured. The beauty of that particular pilot was it was real time, so they could identify people. But there are ways to identify people trying to enroll in other states by even doing simple batch processing matches, and I've highly supported that.
And will the program, you think the program will be expanded nationwide?
That I don't know at this time. If states come forward and say we want to do it, we're certainly interested in it.
Okay. I'll just give you one more question because you really didn't answer before, or I'll give it to any of you, and I always wonder about this. Like I said, I get around my district. I even talk to people here in Washington. But certainly, you know, in Wisconsin, we have big cities, we have little cities. Wherever I go, people are selling their SNAP benefits at 50 cents on the dollar. Now, that indicates to me that they must be getting food from somewhere else or that maybe they don't need the benefits. I would strongly encourage you who are not familiar with that to get out a little bit more and talk to people in the real world and, you know, deal with people in that income class and see how much SNAP benefits are being sold for in your area. But could anybody give me a reason as to why, if we have this huge food crisis in our country, we are selling SNAP, or people are selling their benefits for 50 cents on the dollar? Mr. Carroll?
I'd like to take that question. What we have found, the highest profile of somebody who's likely to engage in that type of activity is, we go back to that ABOD, it's usually a single adult that doesn't have kids, because we very seldom, unless it's identity fraud where it's not the person it's purported to be, we very seldom come across a mom, unless there's a serious other issue like a drug addiction or something, but we very seldom come across a mom who is going to sell the lifeblood of that family for no matter how much. And this is why I want to focus on the vendor rather than the recipient, because if you're a recipient and those ABOD folks get about $111 a month or $114 a month, if you get 50 cents on the dollar, you're talking about they get maybe $60. But if you're a vendor in Opelika and you multiply that over and over, all of a sudden you get $7 million worth of redemptions off an EBT card that you're keeping 20% of with no overhead. And so I agree it's an issue. I don't think that families that are on assistance are selling their food stamps like that. I do think that some of this becomes urban legend because we don't do a good job at curtailing it, so it's difficult to put a number on it. But if we don't go after the vendor side of this, we're never going to stop it. Our focus is on the recipient side, and Undersecretary Concanon talked about how states don't go after recipients. The difference in going after a recipient, you can go after a retail vendor and you can have preponderance of the evidence, and you can use the EBT transactions to shut them down. Because we have a clear and convincing standard. I can bring that standard in, and most of the time when we get it, by the way, it has been under investigation for a number of years. It took 7 months to go through a disqualification. So when we get a lot of the transactions that are given to us, a lot of them a year, 2 years old, we have to rerun more current transactions. But with a clear and convincing standard, we then have to prove they had the intent to commit fraud, and short of having a witness that saw them do it or having some type of admission from the person that they in fact misused their food stamps, it's very difficult to overcome that hurdle, which is why we asked to have that standard reduced to the same as retail merchants where it's preponderance of the evidence, because then we could do exactly what Undersecretary Concanon said and use the EBT usage data to begin taking some of these people off the rolls. Right now, they refer to us, because of the vendors they shut down on average about 21,000. We have 41,000 folks that we're looking at just in the Opelika area. That's 62,000 folks. I don't have enough folks to investigate at the level of investigation you need to disqualify 62,000 folks. I just don't. We've got to stop this at the vendor level, and we've got to reduce the standard on the recipient level.
I'll give you, mind if I give another question?
Last question, out of time.
You gave yourself 19, or
yeah, it's part of being a chairman.
Wisconsin, we have PIN numbers. They have PIN numbers nationwide. Is that a nationwide thing now? Okay, and how about photo ID? Photo on the card. Do you think we should be doing that? Everybody have a photo on the card?
This is where Maine and Florida differ a little bit. We looked into putting photos on the card, and the initial upfront cost would be about $450,000 and then $1 per card. And with 3.3 million recipients, the cost of instituting that would be costly. But what we don't think would, this is why I think we need to target our prevention efforts. Most of the folks that are trafficking in EBT cards, there's a willing vendor who is openly breaking the law and buying these food stamp cards illegally. They're going to continue to do that whether there's a picture on it or not. For the vendors in big box stores, like you work at a Walmart and all of a sudden somebody hands you a card, if you checked the ID and it happens to be Dad, but Mom is on the card, then what happens in that grocery line? We don't know. So we don't think it's a bad idea, but it has to be fleshed out a lot further than that before we go down that road. We think you get a bigger bang for the buck in strengthening the data analytics portion of this, looking at transaction history with vendors, and we think you get a bigger bang for the buck looking at folks coming through the front door, how they're using the EBT card, and drilling down into that stuff to begin to prevent it. I do think, and I think Secretary Mayhew alluded to this, that the fact anecdotally there's been less cards collected, because I do think it would be a deterrent to folks who don't want to trade it because there are pictures on it. But the people that we see in Florida are intent. They could, I'm talking about a small segment that's accounting for a big chunk of this fraud. These folks are criminals. They don't care whose picture's on it. They're going to sell and they're going to traffic in that EBT card.
I thank the gentleman. I thank each of you for your testimony. Let me clear up 2 or 3 little leftover items. So, Mr. Carroll, is it my understanding that you believe that you need more authority as it relates to retailers to be able to go after those bad actors in terms of retailers and transfer some of that authority from USDA to the state to allow you to prosecute the fraud and abuse? Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, and so if we gave you that, you believe that we would be able to not only make a more focused approach on those that are fraudulently trying to game the system without affecting those that Ms. Dean so eloquently put, the real people who need the benefits, that you can go after those bad guys if you had that authority. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All right, so let me, Mr. Concanon, let me come back to you. mentioned pilots, and I mentioned the 2014 Farm Bill. The kind of pilot that I want to see is to give the kind of authority that we just talked about with Mr. Carroll. It would be great if we took Ms. Mayhew, Mr. Carroll, and maybe somebody out west. You get north, south, and you get the west, where you have 3 states that you give that authority, essentially give all of that authority to those states to be able to do that, so that we can monitor it, have Ms. Brown, have USDA monitor that to see if it's making a big difference. It may not. But here's what I'm saying. As someone who will advocate on behalf of a new farm bill that is, as you know, already in the works, that the Ag Committee and that committee is doing a yeoman's job to do a great job to make sure that we have a good farm bill going forward. I want to give them the tools coming out of Oversight and from GAO and the others to say, here's how we define the argument. Because if not, the argument's always going to be is that there's somebody gaming the system. And what I want to do is narrow that to the ones who are gaming it, and let's get them. And the ones who really need the help, that we actually look at increasing the ability to help those that are truly starving in our community. Does that make sense to you? So are you willing to get back to this committee and maybe look at a more defined pilot program? And obviously, we would not be the only committee, but from an oversight standpoint, it would be ours. But the other is obviously work with the chairman of the Ag Committee to look at 3 pilots. I would suggest 2 that are here today and another one out west. I can tell that you're not buying into that, but as long as we get 3 states, to give them that authority where we allow Ms. Brown to look at those numbers, are you willing to commit to do that today?
I'm certainly willing to work with you and with the committee on it. I want to make sure that what we can do is going to be legally okay by the Office of General Counsel.
Well, going after fraud is
No,
legal.
but they may say to us, look, you have that responsibility. You can't turn it over completely to the state. Now, we may be able to give them more authority.
So if it needs a legislative fix, I think you had that in the 2014 Farm Bill, the way that it was worded. Maybe not, but if you need a legislative fix, if you will get your folks to get back with us, we will work in a bipartisan way to set up that kind of thing so that Mr. Carroll doesn't have to try to track down 42,000 people individually and come up with probable cause later. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I think the point, though, he's making that the evidence standard is still a higher one. That hasn't solved that issue.
But that's a different thing. If you give him the ability to go after retailers, some of the evidence standards are not as problematic because the timing of that and the ability to tie the 2 together, where it's not you coming in on one, it allows him to do that. The time gap is certainly very different. Does that make sense?
It could. It could. We're doing variations on that with a western state right now, so we'll have to see whether that works.
Okay, all right. So can you, in the next 120 days, get me an updated report on trafficking, because it's 3 years old, the 2015 report? Can supposedly, you said you were working on it already.
They are working on an update of that.
So what is a reasonable time? If 120 days is not reasonable, what is reasonable?
End of calendar year this year, because it's very complicated, but end of calendar year. December.
So let me, it is so complicated to figure out trafficking that it's going to take 6 months?
They're currently working on it right now, but they've just advised me, the people who are working on it, that we won't have it until the end of the calendar year.
So we'll have the 2015 report in 2017?
Is that correct? 2012 to 14 is the current time period they're working on.
All right, but can you include 2015 in that?
I think they're already working on it, so I don't think they can.
So you can't include, she's shaking her head no, you're saying yes.
Well, they're the researchers, so.
So we will have, let me make sure I understand. We're going to have 2012 through 2014, but no information on 2015 trafficking by the end of the year. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. We'll follow up with you on that. And my final issue is more of a comment, and it gets to something that you talked about earlier. You talked about a rule about addressing the retailers. There is a very big difference between going after fraud with retailers than telling them what they have to stock on a shelf. And you conflate the two, and I'm here to tell you that I'm going to be looking at that very closely. I want your first priority to be fraud. That's what the Farm Bill talked about. And what you're suggesting in your rules is something that perhaps is other than that, and I want to make sure that we're clear that I want you to focus and have your priority on fraud versus on what goes on a shelf.
Well, actually, the Farm Bill authorized depth of stock.
It did.
You know, it isn't just on fraud, it's to improve.
But I'm telling you that my priority is fraud first. The depth of stock and where you're going with it, I think you will find a very, your interpretation of what I voted on is very different than what I voted on. And I'll yield back. And with that, I want to thank all of you for your time. And if there's no further business, this joint committee stands adjourned.